Always at the wrong time.
Recorded.
All right, we're on, my friends. Let me just share my screen and we'll be good. Okay. And slideshow. There, okay, good. Hopefully you're all seeing that. Okay. Okay, so welcome to the September 5 Miles from Anywhere meeting. And we've had our summer hiatus, so it's kind of nice to be back and to see everyone again. Today, Tom Burns is our guest, and we will be discussing his story, The Portrait of Oscar Wilde, as well as his latest Sherlock Holmes anthology. So here is the agenda, our announcements, and then the picture of Oscar Wilde. I guess it's a portrait, the picture of Oscar Wilde, and then our discussion. I'll do a few announcements at the beginning for those of you who don't know our typical format. And then after that, I open it up in case anybody else has some announcements. So first up, the big one, which I've promoted on Facebook, and you may have seen in some of the groups and online, is that Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients, my local Silent Society, turns 50 on Wednesday, on September 11th. And so to celebrate, we're doing a couple of events throughout the year, but the first big one is next Saturday, September 14th, that we are going to do a virtual conference. And when we're done here today, I will send the link out to everyone who's part of 5 Miles in case you want to join. I'll be one of the guest speakers. Eric Skase is going to be on. Larry Feldman, who's with us today, Dr. Ed Chan, and Jim Hawkins are going to be some of our speakers. And it should be a lot of fun. And I hope a lot of you can make it. It's pretty exciting that we hit 50. So very cool. And please join us in the Rocky Mountains if you can. I also want to I don't usually say my crowdfunding stuff, but my latest book, Crimes for Christmas, which I'm doing with the Strand magazine, is currently out on BackerKit. And I'm just announcing it because part of the sales of this book I'm donating to Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients. By the way, Dr. Watson's is a 501c3. If anyone is interested in joining our group or making a donation, please message me or email me after the meeting. I can also send the link out to this. Do not feel any obligation to buy the book, but it's just if you want to also help support Dr. Watson's. I'm donating about 20% of the profits to the Scion Society. And our very own Anna Behrens, who will be our speaker at the October meeting, has the Monadnock Sherlockian Anthology of 2024. It's a collection of essays, poetry, fiction, and drama, and it's phenomenal. Her work is always phenomenal, and it's available on Amazon. It came out in August, and it looks great. And I'll give Anna a chance to talk about it after I'm done the announcements here. And then lastly, you may have seen last week in the Washington Post, there was a review of 2 Sherlock Holmes books. And one of them, John Lawrence, I published it, but he wanted me to just let everyone know about review, and that is the announcements I have. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and go back to everybody else here. Okay, is everyone seeing me again? This is a new computer, so it's really weird how this is working. Anna, do you want to say something about the anthology? You just have to unmute. But we're still not hearing you. Oh, I'm not sure why.
You were coming in and out too, a little bit, Derek.
I was going out?
Yeah. Wait,
at the end.
Oh, I'm not sure what's going on. It might be this new computer. I don't know. Hopefully, I mean, my mic is showing that I'm coming in, but if there's any issues, well, I got to shut up soon anyway. It's going to be Tom's floor, so. um, were there any other announcements for the good of the cause right now?
Derek, I will announce that
Yeah.
we still have one by the end of September is the deadline for if anybody would like to submit a story for our book, the crew the Bark Lone Star is putting out, Mr. Holmes's Neighborhood, which is anybody can write a story about somebody that lives on Baker Street or has to visit Baker Street or work on Baker Street and the chaos that they would see at 221 as they were there. We've already got almost, I think, 25 people that have already submitted stories so far. But
Excellent.
if you do submit a story, we will give you 2 free copies of the book as our thank you. And then we put the book up for free as a PDF up on our website, and then we put it on Barnes and Noble for costs. So we don't make any money off of it, but it's just a fun way for people to participate.
Excellent. As always, and that will be a really fun anthology. I'm sure you got some pretty wacky stories already in that one.
Some of them are really entertaining.
Hey, Steve, have you got any guidelines for it, length, etc.?
We usually shoot for about 3,000 words, but we've had one guy already submit one that's 7,000 words, so
Okay.
we are very flexible on it.
Could you send me an email and I might send you something?
Sure. And I will tell everybody the 2 things that we always tell people. We do not edit for content. The only thing we do is just edit any typos or grammar mistakes. We don't want to, but it is a family book, so please keep it family friendly. And other than that, you can write whatever you want. So.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, let me introduce Tom here. Okay. So, Tom Burns is a Sherlock Holmes author. He's been on this program a couple of times. His work has appeared in the MX Books of New Sherlock Holmes, in the Strand magazine, and in his own books, which we'll talk about. And he's the award-winning author of the Natalie McMaster series, which is also available on Amazon. You can get all of his material there. So without much further ado, Tom, I will give you the floor, and we can get started. Are you able to share your screen?
I'm going to do that right now.
Excellent. And then we'll have a Q&A afterwards.
Okay, so select window or screen. There we go. Allow. Okay. Okay, your browser is preventing access to share screen. That's not good.
Oh, I don't know why that's happening.
Let me try that again. Let's do entire screen. Allow. Your browser is preventing access to your share screen.
Could have an ad blocker or something.
Yeah.
I might. So how do I turn off the ad blocker?
Should be up at your search bar. You should see like a little thing that pops up that says ad blocker, or where your little dots are.
There, you know where it is. Show me. I need to get this going. So my computer expert wife is next to me. So maybe she can show me which icon it is.
Good to have one of those.
Oh yeah, I love her.
Could be a stop sign.
I'm not seeing it. Yep.
Maybe there.
Okay. Let me hang on. I'm going to drop you guys for a second just to see if there's anything different. All right, that's all I've got.
Okay, bring your thing back up.
These guys, okay.
It should be like over in here.
All right. I'm not. What's that?
I don't know.
Nope. Manage account. Nope. Nope. All right, Derek. If you can't see the presentation, and I can't email it because it's too big. What I will do is I will just talk from it.
Sure.
Um,
Do you have another browser, maybe?
I do, but I would have to shut this down and then reconnect through Chrome.
Well,
Why don't you just talk it through?
Let's
I
talk
think
it.
that's
it's
okay.
up to you guys.
Because we'll get the gist of it
Yeah.
from your talk.
You're going to miss some pretty pictures, but I don't know what else I can do. All right, so I'm assuming that most of you have read the story, so you know what's going on. So I'm not going to recap the story, or should I? You tell me.
For some who may not have had a chance to read it, why don't you give us a little brief overview?
All right. Well, let me go through the slides, and then I will give you the denouement at the end. Okay, so the story is The Picture of Oscar Wilde, and the subtitle is Sherlock Holmes Pastiches as Historical Mysteries. Watson wrote the stories in a contemporary setting about events he'd either experienced himself or been told about directly by someone who was there. On the other hand, a pasticheur must write about historical events and settings far removed from our own experience, so exacting research is necessary for an accurate depiction of people and events. When real people appear in a story, or I should say actual people, the author must take care that such people appear as they actually were. Uh, Historical documents should be consulted, including newspapers, biographies, both contemporary and period, and writings by the person in question. All of these can contain valuable information about how someone looked, sounded, and acted. And the same thing is true when actual locations are used. Okay, the Picture of Oscar Wilde appears in my latest volume of Sherlock Holmes stories, and it concerns a case brought to Holmes by the author Oscar Wilde. Several other historical figures besides Wilde are involved, including the artist James McNeill Whistler, Wilde's wife Constance and her child, and the shipping tycoon Frederick Leyland. Actual locations in the story include Wilde's home at 16 Tite Street in Chelsea, Whistler's home on Tite Street in Chelsea, the Peacock Room in Leyland's home, and that is what I wish you could really see. And I would strongly suggest, if you can't see my presentation, just Google Peacock Room and take a look at this thing because it is absolutely amazing. And also Hatchard's Bookstore in Piccadilly. Okay, Oscar Wilde, who is one of the stars of the story, was born in Dublin in 1854. He attended Trinity College, then Magdalen Trinity College in Dublin, then Magdalen College at Oxford. He moved to London in 1879 and attempted to become a society maven and make a name as a writer. He wanted to be the literary face of the aesthetic movement, which could be characterized as promoting art for art's sake. By 1889, he had published Ravenna, Poems, and The Happy Prince and Other Stories, so most of his important work was yet to come. The other thing is you'll notice his birth date. It's 1854. That's the same as Holmes's. So Wilde and Holmes could have attended Oxford at the same time and could have been in the same college. James McNeill Whistler was a painter, born in America in 1834, and he did most of his important work in England and in Europe. Whistler was an all-around artist, painting portraits and landscapes, etchings, and lithographs. He even worked in interior design. He saw himself as the leader of the aesthetic movement in England, and he had a well-known vitriolic personality. He is most famous for um, a portrait of his mother called Whistler's Mother, or his title was A Study in Gray and Black, but he did many other things. Actually, I think Whistler's Mother is quite inferior as a representation of his overall work, but it's the one that everybody knows. So, Whistler and Wilde met each other through the aesthetic movement and became friends. Both men were similar. They were witty, partygoers, and were proud of what they called bon mot, which is witty sayings that might be published in the popular press. Today we'd call them sound bites. Wilde was known to borrow words and ideas from other people and attribute them to himself. And he did that with Whistler. Whistler took exception when Wilde appropriated some of his better bon mots in his lectures or in print. There was a journalist named Herbert Vivian, and this is recounted in the story itself, who wrote some articles about Wilde in the Sun, praising him for material that he'd appropriated from Whistler without attribution. And of course, Vivian's articles didn't attribute it to Whistler either. It was all attributed to Wilde. This made Whistler angry, and he retaliated by writing a letter to the magazine Truth, which was running a series on plagiarism, accusing Wilde of gaining financially by promulgating expressions and concepts of Whistler's. And of course, when this came out in the press, Wilde had to respond in the press, and the battle raged back and forth in several different publications, with each man increasingly disparaging the other. So by the time this story happens, this feud is going full blast. I heard a question? No? Okay. Okay, later on, Wilde wrote a story called The Picture of Dorian Gray. You'll notice my story is entitled The Picture of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde and Arthur Conan Doyle had dinner with Joseph M. Stoddart, the managing editor of the Lippincott's monthly magazine, at the Langham Hotel in London on August 30th, 1889. Each man agreed to submit a story to the new English version of Lippincott's, employing a British editor and British contributors. Doyle's story was The Sign of the Four, and Wilde's was The Picture of Dorian Gray. And this is a good point for me to go ahead and summarize my story. So in my story, Holmes receives a visit from a masked man, whom he immediately recognizes as Oscar Wilde, because Wilde had a very distinctive voice. He's a very big guy. He dresses very flashily. So Holmes recognized Wilde, and Wilde wanted Holmes to find something that had been stolen from him, but he wouldn't say what it was. So they went back and forth, and finally, Holmes told Wilde that you must think I'm a better detective than I am, but, I'm not going to work for you if you can't tell me what you want me to find, because I don't like to fail. So Wilde left. There was a story in the paper in the next day or so about a dust-up between Wilde and Whistler in the street that had degenerated into fisticuffs. So Holmes decided to go over to Wilde's home and see if Wilde had changed his mind. And indeed he had. What had happened was that Wilde had a portrait of himself in his home. painted by an American artist named Harper Pennington. And Wilde was coming home and finding out that the painting was being altered. It was becoming increasingly ugly. And Wilde thought he might be going nuts because he keeps seeing this painting changing and there's no rhyme or reason for it. And then somebody broke in and stole the painting. This is what Wilde wants Holmes to recover. Um, Given the fact that the painting was changed and some investigation at Wilde's home shows evidence of a break-in, Holmes goes down to Whistler's house, which is just down the street, and talks to Whistler about it. And of course, Whistler disavows any knowledge of it, but he has snippy things to say about Wilde and Holmes, and even at one point accuses Watson of writing for the Penny Dreadfuls, which were very cheap, tawdry stories that were published at the time. So Holmes stakes out Whistler's place and finds that Whistler's being visited by a local burglar. So he has a pretty good idea of what happened. And there's also been other burglaries in Chelsea and around of artistic people. And of course, he deduces that the burglar who is working for Whistler and who stole the painting is also breaking into these other homes to steal what he can. So he braces Whistler and tells him that, I know what you're doing. And if you don't help me get this guy, I'm going to tell the police and you're going to jail as an accomplice. And Whistler doesn't like that idea. So he sets this burglar by the name of Percy Thorne to break into the home of the shipping tycoon Frederick Leyland, who has this beautiful room in his house called the Peacock Room, which Whistler painted over several years. And Holmes and Watson, in true Sherlock Holmes fashion, stake out the place waiting for the burglar to show up. He does show up. Lestrade is there. They clap the derbies on him and cart him off. And Whistler also returns Wilde's portrait to him, which has been defaced. And what Whistler was going to do is he was going to exhibit that ugly picture as a means of embarrassing further Oscar Wilde. The story closes with a little interchange between Holmes and Watson, where Watson wonders if their friendship will ever go the way of Wilde's and Whistler's, and Holmes basically says he doesn't think so. Also, if you get a chance to read the story, I did annotate it. I put in pictures, I put in footnotes, which are not in the published version in my book, to explain some of these things. And obviously, the implication is that Wilde got the idea for the picture of Dorian Gray from this episode, because the picture of Dorian Gray is about a picture that was painted of the protagonist Dorian Gray that ages instead of Gray aging. And Gray stays young and beautiful and lives a reprehensible life, but the portrait, which he has hidden away in his home, gets older and more hideous as life goes on. And I won't spoil the ending of the picture of Dorian Gray for you if you haven't read it, but it does have a surprising and relatively tragic ending. Um, okay, so I guess that's pretty much all I've got. Um, I'm sorry again that you can't see the presentation. There's also a video for it up on my YouTube channel. And maybe I'll send that to you, Derek, the link, so people can go check out the video. And I guess that's it.
All right, let's give a virtual round of applause for Tom, and then we'll get into our question and answer and interview part. But before that, I do want to say what I did, Tom, as you were talking, is I went ahead and I put in my slideshow some images of the Peacock room. So let me just share those, because it is a stunning room if no one has seen it. Let me just, I'll share my screen just for a second. And as you can see, it is stunning. And this is Whistler's Peacock room. And here's you just do slides so you guys see a little bigger. And then here's a second kind of part of it. I'm guessing this is the other part.
That's the back of it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
And he did this to give Leyland a place to exhibit his art. But the problem was that Leyland didn't want him to do all of that.
Really?
So Leyland didn't pay him what he wanted, and he paid him in pounds, not guineas, which was important because he was treating him like a tradesman instead of an artist. And Whistler actually engineered in the story that the burglars should go here just to piss off Leyland, who shows up, and his house is full of police and burglars, and he's not happy. But Whistler was that kind of guy. He was not a nice man. So okay, I'm done.
All right. I got a couple questions. I'll kind of interview you a little bit, and then I'll open it up for the floor. But I guess my first question, really, I'd like to know, because this was a research-based pastiche, and you had a lot of locations in it. You mentioned the importance of locations. You had the two characters, the artists in particular. So how long did it take you to complete the research before you wrote it, or did you do research while you were writing it? Like, what was your kind of, as a pastiche author myself, I'm always curious about that. How was your method of creating the story?
That's a good question. I read there is a contemporary biography of Oscar Wilde, which was just published a couple of years ago. And I can't call the name of the author, but if you look on Amazon, you'll find it. And I read that in its entirety, and that's probably 800 or 900 words. But obviously, I did not use all of it because most of it occurred after the period of the story. And I also found a biography of Whistler, which is about of equal length, and read that as well. But as for the details in the story, this is the age of the internet. So when I'm writing something, I research it on the fly. So, I knew, for example, that Wilde lived at 14 Tite Street in Chelsea. I could find a picture of 14 Tite Street, which is still there, although now it's been renumbered as 34. So I could describe the house. The biography contained a description of the house at the time of the story, so I was able to use that. So I knew that Wilde had a study at the top of the house. I knew that he had a portrait in the house painted by Harper Pennington. So a lot of it, it probably took me 2 weeks to write the story itself. But the details I just retrieve as I need them. And there's so much Victoriana on the internet. It's just astonishing. There are maps. I think I've mentioned before the map called Booth's London, which shows me the neighborhoods and whether they were affluent or whether they were poor, stuff like that. I use the directories, for shops and things like that. So really, it's pretty quick in general for my Sherlock Holmes stories. I research them as I write them.
Okay, excellent. I guess one follow up, and then I'll open it up more to the floor. I have other questions, but I don't want to be a hog. one of the things, again, this is going to be more of a writing question. So you always have to kind of pick and choose how you're going to write your story, and I felt like you kind of played this one straight. I mean, it was pretty much a straight Sherlock Holmes, very traditional story. One of the things I was kind of surprised that didn't come up was the fact that both Whistler and Wilde were witty. I mean, like they had some really good lines back and forth, and I don't know whether they didn't fit with the historical time of this particular piece, but I know there's a famous quote that Wilde said about Whistler, that Whistler can't spell the word art without the letter I, which
That's
is
right.
he's so pompous and and self-centered, which I always thought that was such a great zinger. And so I was just curious why you didn't include that. And obviously, I mean, more of a contemporary thing you could have included is both. There's evidence that both Whistler and Wilde, of course, were homosexuals. And so that's another thing. I was just curious, like, you did a little bit play up the dandiness of Wilde with his outfit, but that was something I thought you kind of decided to stay away from in this.
Well, Langdale Pike did show up.
Yep.
And Pike, I don't know that he mentioned the quote you're referring to, but he did talk about the feud, and I don't have the story in front of me, and remember if he had any of the witty rejoinders or not. The homosexuality thing, it's arguable whether Wilde had homosexual tendencies at the time of the story. He was married, he had kids. He claimed always that he was seduced by, what's his name, the young boy, the Marquis of Queensberry's son. That he was seduced and it took time and those homosexual tendencies developed. So I don't know at the time if he was actively homosexual since he was married with kids. So it really didn't play into the story. And that's why I didn't mention it, because I was keeping it in the period. And I also, didn't see any reason to, it was in Watson's voice and Holmes. So, I didn't see any reason to go off into the future at the end of the story.
No, that's fair.
Mhm.
Again, that's why I was wondering if it had to do with the time period, which you answered. Let me open it up. You can use the hand raise feature, or just kind of unmute and ask the question if you'd like. Larry, I know you had a question. Do you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to ask about why you thought Holmes's view on art were like Ayn Rand's views on art. Seems to me Holmes would be I don't know. Just seems to me that he always appreciated the beauty in nature, and he would appreciate beauty for its own sake. And
But
so the whole idea of Holmes saying, I would only, art is there to express the morals of the artist. That's to me, that's pretty out there.
there is no appreciation without someone to appreciate.
Right.
So art without humanity would have no meaning. And I think Holmes, in his logic, would see that. if there were no people on the earth, the beauty of the earth doesn't matter because there's nothing that would experience the beauty. There is no beauty. And to me, that would be Holmes's logic. Now, obviously, Rand wrote much later, but that
Sure.
was her thesis, and I just saw it aligning with Holmes's view of the world because he's a very practical person. That's not to say that he wouldn't appreciate art, and he loves music.
Right.
But again, what good is music if no one hears it? So
Okay.
that's what I was going for.
I understand. Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, that I thought that was an interesting
Yeah.
quote as well. Because in the way I interpreted it was that Holmes was saying that the morality of the artist interprets, goes with the art, and so
Yeah, that's
that
what I'm saying. Is that
Yeah.
how the artist feels should be irrelevant. The artist's morality should be irrelevant. It's what the receiver receives from it. And when they're sure without the receiver, there's no point. But the receiver gives the meaning to the art with his own background and experience and predilections and prejudices.
But you could also argue that the artist puts the meaning in the art, and if the artist is skilled, then the viewer will appreciate the and maybe morality was not the best word, but it will
Right.
appreciate the meaning that the artist is trying to instill, the point that the artist is trying to get across. Um, and that's dependent solely on the artist. If somebody paints something hideous, with the intent of scaring you or disgusting you, that will certainly be apparent. And it will certainly have something to say about the morality of the person who did that.
All right. Well, it's
But and the
different
thing,
ways to look at it. Yeah.
while we're on this too, it's interesting because I think James McNeill Whistler was a fairly I don't want to say a bad person, but he's not somebody I'd want to have a beer with. Yet some of his stuff is so stunningly beautiful. Um, I really don't think it belies the personality of the man that created it.
Yeah. All right. I mean, of course, there's an issue always with Doyle, whether his art, whether his work stands aside from some of the things he did later in his life and believed in later in his life in terms of spiritualism and stuff like that. And so it's like, art, but it doesn't, it's not where his art takes you if you're reading the Sherlock Holmes stories anyway.
Oh, I think Doyle was a consummate. He created characters, and he was true to his characters. So if he had written a story about spiritualism, I don't think he would have had Holmes being, you know, sentimental to spiritualism, and
Yeah.
maybe that's why he didn't do it.
Well, that's right. He wrote one for Professor Challenger,
Hmm.
which was more supernatural,
Yeah.
more like an Indiana Jones sort of adventure supernatural guy.
Hmm.
So that made more sense in that context than in a Sherlock Holmes context. But yeah, that's what he did.
I mean, I never saw him really violate the character that he created for Holmes. Holmes is Holmes, and that's the great thing about him.
Sure. No, you're right. That's why the art stands on its own. In other words, it doesn't matter what Doyle believed. The point is, what Doyle believed about spiritualism is irrelevant to the Sherlock Holmes stories because it's all about what Sherlock Holmes believes and experiences, and what Watson believes and experiences. So again, that's That's why, it struck me a little funny that, you said it's the morality of the artist. That's the point in art. But then again, I don't know if
Okay,
detective stories are art anyway, but
they are.
so, well, then there you go. I'm right.
Other questions, and you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask. If not, I've got other questions, so just want to pause to see if other audience members do for Tom.
Now I can't get to the chat. Oh, there it is. Let me see. No, I don't see anything in the chat. So
Nope, nothing in the chat.
I just had a question about the
there you go.
Peacock Room. The portrait in the Peacock Room that you showed, Derek, I assume was painted by Whistler. Do we know who that was, or is that one of?
it was an Oriental personage, and it was painted because the room was going to be used to exhibit Oriental pottery. So it was more archetypical than a specific person.
Okay. I just liked it a lot better than I liked Whistler's mother.
Most of his stuff I like better than Whistler's mother.
Yeah.
I do not know why that picture came to represent him the way it has when you look at the bulk of his work.
Okay, thank you.
I had some pictures in the PowerPoint of his nocturnes, which are very impressionistic. Nocturne meaning landscapes viewed at night, and he uses his brushwork to make them very wispy and indistinct, and as you look at them, you start to see more and more things, as you would if you were looking at a scene at night and your eyes were adjusting, and things emerge from the background. It's really truly astonishing, and I would love to go somewhere where they're exhibited so I could see them in person rather than just on the internet. But the guy was, he was a consummate artist. He really was.
Tom, how about, I was just curious about the other books in your anthology. I'm sorry, not books, stories in your anthology. Do any of them also connect to history, or are they, or do any of them have like follow-ups to this particular piece? You could just, because you chose this story out of all of them to share with us today. I was just curious if there were other historical ones in this particular book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Okay, and I don't have. Wait a minute. Let me drag up a copy of it here. I've got it online. So my memory is not what it used to be either, Derek. I hate to say it. What am I looking for? Okay, Finder, come on. Dispatch box, there it is. Okay, so let me just get the if I can find the table of contents. Story list. All right, here we go. Okay, yeah, so what I try to do is I try to show aspects of Victoriana in the stories. So the first story in the book is The Wizard Goes a Mudlarkin. And the wizard, of course, is Sherlock Holmes. And these are the days in Montague Street, so there is no Watson. And he was called the wizard by this bunch of kids that live in the Montague Mews because he entertained them one day with some prestidigitation, making coins disappear and things like that. And the Mudlarks were the poor kids who went down to the Thames and tried to dig stuff out of the mud just to get a little bit of food, or if they were really lucky, the room for the night. So in that story, one of the mudlarks, who's a kid, dies, and he's down on the Thames, and it's the brother of one of the Montague Muse boys. So Holmes goes down to help the boy get his brother away from the body dealers, who are guys who went around with wagons picking up all the dead people in London that nobody wanted. And this is one of the things I try to bring out. You don't think of London that way, but that's what happened to poor people who didn't have family. They just died, and if they didn't get a burial from the parish, somebody picked them up and sold their body to whoever might want a body, and it was perfectly legal. Another story is Death in the Workhouse, which talks about the workhouses where the poor people went if they were indigent, and the conditions in there, what it was like. Holmes went in because a man died, and his brother came to Holmes and wasn't convinced that the death was not suspicious. And it turned out, and this is historical, that the workhouses didn't even report deaths. They just shipped the bodies out to be buried in Potter's Field or whatever. What else is historical? The Agony Column Cipher. I think I talked about that a little in an earlier 5 Miles. Holmes is living in Sussex, and he finds a cipher in the Agony Column, and he starts to mess with it just out of boredom. He thinks it's probably a substitution cipher, and it's going to be, some kind of romantic assignation. But he finds out really quickly that it's a very complicated code, and eventually relates to some nefarious things having to do with the beginning of World War One. So, I try to, a lot of my ideas, I read Victorian newspapers, and I'll see incidents that actually happened, and then I do, well, what if Holmes got involved? How would this incident play out if it turned into a Sherlock Holmes story? And I found that very productive to, give my stories a flavor of the time, so to speak.
No, that's great. It's cool that you actually read the newspapers, the historical ones. It is always a great way to get some ideas for stories.
There's one called the Illustrated Police Gazette, which is my favorite. And it's all of the stuff that people, all of the horrible stuff that people do to each other, and which unfortunately hasn't changed very much. Honestly, you see the same stuff that you see now, but if you can get access to newspapers.com, which is where I find them, I really recommend it, just for entertainment, if nothing else. Read those things. It'll give you a much better idea of the world that Holmes lived in. Derek, you've gone out again. I see
All
a
right.
bunch.
Any
All right.
me? You guys?
Well, yeah, you
can you hear me
stopped.
now?
You stopped moving, and your picture froze, and I saw a bunch of muted mics. So maybe the gremlins are in the computers today.
Maybe. Does anybody have any last questions for Tom before we wrap up?
I'll send you the URL for my YouTube channel, and you can also see the video on Facebook. But I had a video made for the book, and I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, please do send that, because as you know, I always do follow-ups, and I will send those out to everyone, as well as I'll send them the title of your book. That includes the story as well, in case anyone wants to look it up or purchase it.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. And thanks to everyone for listening.
All right, let's give another virtual round of applause for Tom. And thank you so much for being here. Always enjoy having you on. Well, next month, we're going to have our own Anna Behrens, who I mentioned earlier, who did the editor of the Monadnock Sherlockian anthology. And she's going to give a talk, and perfect for the Halloween season, on Jean Leckie, as we know, Doyle's second wife, and how she went from being in a relationship with Doyle to being a medium. And she's also going to be having an article in the that this talk is based on, which will be in the next edition of Steel True Blade Straight, which I forgot to mention in the announcements at the beginning. But if you are interested in submitting a story or an article to Steel True Blade Straight, which is the journal of Doyle and Holmes, but we do have a big emphasis on Doyle as well in it, and where it's published in association with the Arthur Conan Doyle Society. So if anyone would like to contribute an article or a story, please just email me, and I'll put it up in my next follow-up email for 5 miles. Okay. All right. Anything else before I wrap it up? All right. Thank you all. So I look forward to seeing you on October 5th, and take care. Bye, everyone. Tom,
Bye.
thank you again.